That's about learning. Should have to do some English immediately. Also for Shleima, for Filmas and Sarah. Okay. We're going to start on Yud Gimel. Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. We're up to Amar of Gidl Amar. It's 5 lines down from the top. Yeah. The important thing to note before we begin is that we had a Mishnah that says that bundles are forbidden to use for schach, like bundles, stalks of reeds or bundles of wood. You can't use those for schach. And the explanation was there was a gzeira that you might be doing it for storage. You might be putting those bundles up on the roof to dry, and then you change your mind. You said, you know what, it's up there already, I'll use it for schach. And that was considered tasa b'lei menaseh. So therefore, even if you put it up for schach, initially for schach, it wasn't good because of what you could have done. You put it up for storage and change your mind. So Amar Rav Gidl Amar Rav Gidl says in the name of Rav, Hay afkusa de dikla mesachem bo. Yeah, afkusa de dikla. I don't know exactly what this looks like. I don't know. But apparently on the bottom of the palm tree, there are sticks that are sticking out. So the question is, you have a bunch of sticks. We just said in the Mishnah, a bunch of sticks you can't use for schach if they're bundled together. Turns out, this afkusa de dikla is a bunch of sticks, and they're all tied together. Yeah, naturally, they're part of the tree. So he says you can use these for schach. Afagav de agidi, they're all tied. It's bundled. Says agidi agid bidei shemaim leishmei agid. It's bundled by heaven. That's not a bundle. It's naturally together. So then it says, 1 second. What about if you then went and you tied? You see the sticks are coming out, protruding outwards. Maybe you bound it together to keep it tight, like we do to our lulav. We tie. Yeah, it's all connected. The lulav, all the branches are connected. But then you put a rope around a lulav branch on to tie it together. So afagav the hadar agadu. But then when you go and you tie it together, don't worry about that because you get bechad leishmeaged. What are you binding? You're binding together one thing. Give you a bundle of a pencil. It's one already. Why? Just the rope that you put around it doesn't turn it into a bundle. Why is it one? Because even though it's so many, because it's naturally bound together. So it's these two reasons together. First of all, igid bidei shemayim, when it's bound together naturally, it's already considered one. And now even if you tie it together, so you just tied one. It's just one thing, it's not a bundle. That's going to come up. It's a big sugya. Yeah. The problem with the mat is not a bundle issue. The problem with the mat is that maybe it's considered a utensil, like a tabletop, or it's a mat that's made for sleeping, then maybe it's a makabel tumah. Yeah. So if it's made for schach, for shade, then that's regular shade, that's like regular branches. But if it's made as a mat that people sit on, then that would be a problem. If it's made as a blind, as a curtain. Yeah, all of these things are questions. It's a big sugya later. And menastam, that's the big question, is menastam, what do you say that it is? Okay. Amar Rav Chizda. Good morning, guys. Amar Rav Chizda, Amar Ravina. Amar Ravina Bar Shila. Rav Chizda says the name of Ravina Bar Shila. Hani dukri dekani misachem bo. So dukri dekani is similar to what we just said. It's a bunch of reeds that are attached at one point, and they just branch out like prickly things. Afagav dagidi neno, even though they're bound together, but don't worry about that because eged b'dei shemayim leishmeaged. It's bound by heaven. It's not really tied together. We're talking about can't use bundles of things for stop because maybe you bundled it to dry it, and then. So here we're saying if you just have something that has a bunch of like needles that are sticking out of it, thorns, let's say, sticking out of it, it's not a problem because that's not a bundle because it's naturally attached. Even if you then went and you tied it together, the points of it, that's not a problem because it was attached naturally. Tanya Namiachi was also taught in the Brisa. Kanim v'dekranim, reeds and reeds. The kranim is something that points. It looks like it's like a handle of a shovel or a hoe or something, but that would be a problem because that would be makabel tumah. Here it says kanim v'dekranim nisachem. Kanim pshita. Of course you can use reeds. So what do you use for schach? You use reeds. It says no. Ema kanim shel dekranim nisachem. We're talking about it's reeds that are sticking out like needles from one point. And we're saying that you're allowed to use that for schach because we don't say that it's considered bound together because it's naturally attached. And even if you tied it, we say that that's not a problem. Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Ravina Bar Shila. We mentioned Rav Chisda in the name of Ravina Bar Shila. We get a little bit off topic just because he said something in his name in the conversation. We add this point. Hani Marirta da Agma. This lettuce from the meadow, it's either a horseradish or it's a lettuce. It's something that we would use for mara, and it grows in the agam. So it's Marirta da Agma. Adam Yetivem Yidei Chavasa bePesach. You can use it on Pesach for mara. In case you're stuck out there, you find this Marirta da Agma from one of the natives. So it's fine. Meisvei, the Gemara has a question. When it comes to the hyssop, it says Ezav. Hyssop was used for different things. One of them was for the paraduma. You would use it to sprinkle the water. So it says Ezav. When it says the hyssop, it says V'la Ezav Yafan. You can't use Greek hyssop. V'la Ezav Kuchli. You can't use the blue hyssop. V'la Ezav Midbari. You can't use the desert hyssop. V'la Ezav Raimi. You can't use the Roman hyssop. V'la Ezav Sheish Le'Shem Levai. You can't use any hyssop that has a modifier on it. Anything that's defining what type of Ezav it is. It has to be just plain Ezav. Amar. Yeah, but it used to paint on the door.
What if somebody claims the regular hyssop?
They claim it's regular hyssop.
And what if they claim that that's the southern country basis? This is their.
Oh, wait a second. You'll see this. American hyssop. Right? Amar Abaya says, "Kolshin ishtana shema yikedemat entire." Oh, okay, 1 second. I didn't explain the question. The question was, we said that you're allowed to use Marirta da Agma, meadow murder. 1 second. When it came to the Ezav, you couldn't use any Ezav that had a modifier on it. Why are you allowed to use meadow murder? That's a modifier. That means it's not what the Torah was referring to. The Torah says that al matzis and murder, you just have plain murder, not meadow murder. So Abaya explains, Kol shenashtana shmei kedemat Torah. Depends. Were there different names at the time the Torah was given? If there were different names at the time the Torah was given, so then the Torah tells me which one to use. And it says, don't use any of those, use this one. Obviously, it has, those have a modifier. Okay, so that's the problem. The ones that had a modifier, and the Torah says, don't use those, so then you are not doing the mitzvah if you do use them. But these things, before Matan Torah, they didn't have different types of maror. It was just all maror were one category. So when the Torah says to use maror, it wasn't excluding any type of maror. There were no other types of maror. I mean, there were other types, but there was no name for them. So the Torah never excluded them by saying use maror. But the other things, there was already a market and a name, this type, that type. So when the Torah says use Ezav, So it was saying not that type of Ezev, not that type of Ezev. That's Abaya's answer. Rava Amar Hani Merirta Stama Shemayu. By the Karla Merirta Dagma, Mishum de Mistakach Bagma. Rava has a different answer. Rava says there's different types of modifiers. There's a type of modifier that becomes part of the name itself, like a teacup. Teacup becomes the name of. Is a teacup one word? It becomes one word, right? Is it one word or is it hyphen? Is it hyphen?
Well, it's going to be one word. You're a hyphen.
It's two separate
words, but you can't say couple. I think.
That's one word.
It's not one word?
It is.
It is one word. Yeah. Okay. So Google. Okay. Check if Google's right. So but then you have a type of modifier. You have a type of modifier that it's not one word. It doesn't become. It's a description of what we're talking about. So it's not the name. It's just saying, look, this is a white cup. It's not a white cup. It's happens to be a cup that's white. So Merir Tadagma doesn't mean that it's the name. It's just defining what it is. It's where you find it. You find it in the Agam. It's not the name. So the Torah says Mar doesn't mean not that one. It's because the Agma is not part of the name, like teacup. Okay. We're talking about bundles. We said a bundle was a problem for schach. Amar Rav Chizda, Iged b'chad leishmei Iged. Rav Chizda says that to tie one thing together, it's already one. It's not considered a bundle. Shalish, 3 items, 3 sticks. Shmei Iged, that is a bundle. Shnayim, but what about 2? It's not the nishtahin, nishtaher. It's not 1 and it's not 3. So that is machlekes Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan. That's a machlekes Tanoim. Machlekes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanan. What is that? About teacup? Oh, okay. So
you get Greek and Roman, right?
Yeah.
That was after non-Torah. So is that the case there of before Torah?
Yeah.
They didn't exist at that time. How could it modify it?
Yeah. The professor's asking that if the Ezev had those names before Matan Torah, was there really Ezev Yavan and Ezev Reimi before Matan Torah? I mean, the countries existed. The nations, I don't know if they existed. You know, there was a place called Rome. Oh, unless not. Italia Shalia. Shlomo Melech went to, when he married Baspare, so the Gabriel put the stick in he made a new country.
Well, Romi can also be a place in Israel. I know that there's some machloket about that. About Mashiach and the gates. Yeah.
The gates of Rome.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, so we have a machlekes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanan. The difficulty with the following Gemara, it's not a difficulty, we just have to work it out, is when it tells you that it's a machlekes Rabbi Yossi and Rabbanan, it doesn't tell you who holds what. And it's going to be a little bit confusing for us because we're going to think it's going one way. We're going to learn it again. It's going to actually be going the other way. So that's the point of this Gemara. Basically, we're talking about 2 items together that are tied. Is that considered a bundle? The example that we're going to use is Ezev. Is the Hissap that we spoke about before. Okay, it's used in the Paraduma. So it goes like this. Ditanan, the sword in the Mishnah. Mitzvah Ezev. The mitzvah of Ezev. Shleisha Klachim is 3 stalks. Behem Shleisha Gevalim. And on it, well, Klachim actually means roots. 3 roots. And on it is Shleisha Gevalim is 3 reeds with 3 stalks. Okay, that's the Tanakama. What do they hold? Apparently, they hold that you need 3. That means 2 is not considered a bundle. You're supposed to have a gudas ezer. You don't have a bundle yet if you have 2. Rabbi Yossi Aimer mitzvah says of shleisha gevalim. Rabbi Yossi says the mitzvah is 3. Okay, so far we don't see a machlekes. We just see that it needs to be 3 reeds. B'shiyar of shnayim. You see what would happen with the ezer is if you would reuse it to sprinkle the water, you may it would get rubbed out, or something may one of the sticks, the stalks may fall out of the bundle. So shiyar of shnayim, it's okay if one falls out. You're still left with 2. It's still considered the bundle because seems like you started with 3, you left with 2. It's fine. Regardum of kolshu, and the stub that's left could be the smallest amount of a stub. That's also good because it would get rubbed out. As long as you started with the stalk and a root, it's still good. Kasal kadaitin, it entered our mind to understand this, explain that midish shiyar of shnayim, according to Rabbi Yossi, if you can have 2 at the end of the story, 2 stalks is good. So tfilasin amishnayim. So you can start with 2 also. So why did Rabbi Yossi say that you need 3? That's the mitzvah. That's just something l'chatchila. My cousin probably. After my cousin. Rabbi Lipska had it. I don't know if it's maybe in another room. We made a theum. Maybe there was a theum recently on my cousin. Maybe he used it. So we're saying that according to Rabbi Yossi, we think that 2 is considered a bundle. Yeah, why? Because if you're left with 2, it's good. Probably if you started with 2, it's also good. So why did Rabbi Yossi say 3? He says, well, there's a difference between lechatchila, you should have 3, but it's okay if you don't. If Rabbi Yossi holds that the 3 is just a mitzvah, not an obligation, not a mitzvah versus obligation. It's a mitzvah. It means a lechatchila, that it's a lechatchila, but not a b'di'evah, not it's me'akiv. So the Rabbanan shleish l'akif. So according to the Rabbanan, 3 would be what's the word for me'akiv? We had it before. Me'akiv. No. Oh, you found it? Oh no, he wants the other one. Okay, thank you. Don't worry. He'll bring it down. I'll bring it down after. Yeah, ma'akiv means that it affects the validity. So the Rabbanan say that it needs to be 3, and Rabbi Yossi says it doesn't need to be 3. Which means that Rabbi Yossi holds 2 is a bundle, and the Rabbanan hold 3 as a bundle. That's exactly what Rav Chisda was saying. That there's a machlekes Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan regarding 2. Invalid. Yeah, both. Right. There was a word that he uses for that. But Hatanya, there's a problem. Is the Nikusa? No, this is the question. Nikusa comes later. Hatanya, but there's a problem with this. Rabbi Yossi says that Ezev shet filasi shnayim b'shiyar v'echad pasal. Rabbi Yossi says if it starts with 2 or it ends with 1, ends up being 1 because 2 fell out. Because you're supposed to start with 3. 2 fell out. It starts with 2 or it ends up with 1. Both of those are pasal. It's only kosher if it starts with 3 and it can end with 2. So things are getting not so clear. We wanted to say it's a machlekes Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan about what 2 is. Is 2 a bundle? Right? It's 2 a crowd. We said that Rabbi Yossi said 2 is considered a bundle. Now we're saying 2 is not a bundle. It's only 3 that's a bundle. The Gemara says Eipach. Let's change the whole story. Rabbi Yossi shloisha la'akev. According to Rabbi Yossi, you need 3. L'Rabbanan shloisha la'mitzvah. And according to the Rabbanan, the 3 was when the Rabbanan started off. They said mitzvah seizev shloisha klachim. Now it actually fits in. That's the mitzvah. That's the extra, but it's not ma'akev. Really, 2 would be enough according to the Rabbanan. V'hatanya, and I'll prove it to you. Eizev tchilasei shnayim. The mitzvah of Eizev shet tchilasei shnayim. Eizev that starts with 2 stalks together. Vishi yaravecha. Or it ends up with 1. It's kosher. It's kosher. Ve'in apostle, and it's only invalid. Ad sheyeh tchilasei vishi yaravecha. It's only possible if it starts with 1, and it's possible if it ends with 1. The Gemara says, "Shiyaravechet possible." It ends with 1. It's going to be possible. According to the Tanakama, said that it can start with 2, and it can end with 1 if you start with 2. He said it can end up with 1. The Gemara explains this. So this is not a big issue. It's just the way you read the Brisa. We read it as or. I translated the Vishi Yaravechet as or ends with 1. Turns out it wasn't supposed to be read or. You have to read it. It's only possible if it starts at the outset. As the halacha would be at the end, 1. It starts and ends with 1. It's an and. Vishi Yaravechet would mean like Kishi Yaravechet, like this. So, okay. Now we have the machlekes, Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan, where Rabbi Yossi said that you only need 2 as a bundle. No, Rabbi Yossi says we concluded that Rabbi Yossi holds 3 is a bundle, and the Rabbanan hold 2 is a bundle. That's how we ended up. Darash Mareimar. Mareimar taught, Hani Suraisa the Surah. These bundles of Surah, there's a type of wood that in Surah they would sell. You see, when we were talking about bundles before that you can't use for stock, we're talking about that they would get these pieces of wood would get bundled, and then you would have to dry it out. So you would put it up on the roof to dry, and that was the concern that maybe that would be you put it up to dry using it for stock. This type of wood, the Saraisa de Surah, was not dried in the bundle. It was sold by the dozen or something. So they sold it in a bundle, but it wasn't a bundle that was used for drying. It was a different sort of. It was just the way. That's how they bundled it. Misachimbu. You can use for schach. Avagav da'adnan. It's a bundle. He's told me Mishnah and everything. You can't use a bundle. That's l'minyana ba'al da'adnan. That's not a real bundle. That was just bundled to know how many there are in there. They would bundle it for the amount. Count it. Okay. And actually, when they would get home, they would actually unbundle it to dry it. It wasn't dried in the bundle.
The issue is whether the bundle actually sell it from the roof and stuff, or whether it's just transport one.
A transport bundle, right? About the certain types of herbs that I don't know if people do this, but I remember Big Dill they had like in a bundle. Some people would put the whole thing in. So they kept it in the bundle. Other things they sell it in the bundle, but you open it up and you know. So there's different types of bundles.
They sell a floor tile. You send them by a pallet. You don't put a pallet on the floor, right? That's just transportation.
Yeah. Right. Okay, Amar Rababa. Rababa taught. Rababa says, "Honey, 3 feet the orpany." This is a type of net that's used in the pictures. It's it comes to a point on the top. You can see that. It comes to a point on the top. And it's a type of net, maybe they would use to catch birds or something. So, Kivan Shahut Rashi Madanim Shalem Ksherim. Now, the truth is it's tied. So it could be viewed as a bundle. But if you take off the top ring, the top tie, then it opens up and then you can use it for schach. But it's tied on the bottom. Rav Papa the Sharilu. We're talking about that you untied it. Now, it's not much of a chiddush anymore if it's untied. Yeah. Rav Huna, or is this Amar? Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua. Rav Huna and Breder Rav Yeshua is in Rav Papa are friends, the same generation. Afilu tema delayshar. You could even say that you didn't untie it. But kol eged shein asel letalta leishmi eged. You see, Rav Papa's chiddush must be. Let's see this. Maybe it's Rashi. Shari lahu. Yeah. Rashi explains that even though you've untied it, but you didn't take the rope out. The rope is still there. It's just loose. Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua says that even if it's tied, but if you start to move it around, it'll fall apart because you needed two ties. You needed one on the bottom, one at the top to hold it together. But now just one tie on the bottom, the things will fall out. So you can't really move it at this point. In anything that if you would move it, it would fall apart, that's not considered a bundle. Lettuce, any vegetables that the Chacham said that you can be yaitze the mitzvah of Mar or on Pesach, meviyim esatuma. Careful. Stand there. Meviyim esatuma. Maybe a satuma means that if there's tuma underneath it and there's a keli underneath it, the tuma will spread from one thing to from the tuma will spread to the keli. Why? Because it's under the same roof. So if you have a lettuce, yeah, I'm trying to imagine. You have these big leaves. It's called elephant ears. It's just like a decorative. It's huge leaf. So if you have this piece of lettuce, this huge piece of lettuce, it's tefach would do it. But and underneath it is tuma, and underneath it is also a keli. So miviyim es tuma, it will spread. But let's say on top of it is a keli, so it won't protect it. Now the issue here is that it's makabel tuma itself. It's considered an edible. What protects the tumah from spreading upwards is something that's not makabel tumah. But if it's makabel tumah itself, so it could become tameh, and then what's above it would also be tameh. It's not touching with, but it doesn't protect. That's why this is coming in here. Lettuce for schach is not counted. It's not counted. My time, the Gemara asks, why not? When it's going to dry up, it's going to fall down, and it's going to dry up and fall down. So it's not really counted as schach. You have to view the schach as how it's going to be throughout Sukkot. This is just going to crumble. Yeah, we have another problem. What about that it's food? Yerakas are food. So Rashi explains this, that there's a difference between schach pasel and no schach at all. Schach pasel is better than no schach. Schach pasel, if you have a board on top of your sukkah, let's say something, a piece of metal or something that you can't use for schach, how much of that will ruin your sukkah? It says 4 tvachim. Let's say you have no schach, just to empty a gap on top of your sukkah. How much of that will ruin your sukkah? That's 3 tvachim. Now, when we get to that sukkah, schach pasel idea, it has to do with a whole line of empty space going straight down your sukkah, dividing your sukkah in half, which leaves 2 walls on this side, 2 walls on that side. Whatever the case is, the chiddush over here is that it's not considered schach pasel, it's considered avir. Avir is here, English. Yeah. It's not considered schach at all because it's going to crumble and fall. Come on, the lesson dummy. Okay, from here until the Mishnah is a sugya about yadis. Yad. Yad means, it literally means a handle. What it's relevant for is hilchas tumah. Let's say there's a fruit, an apple, let's say, has a little stem on it. So if tumah touches the apple, if it was wet once, it will become tamei. Let's say it touches the stem. So if the stem is used to hold the fruit, it's considered a handle for the fruit, it becomes tamei. The fruit becomes tamei. And the other way, if tumah touches the fruit, the stem becomes tamei, if it's considered a handle. But let's say the apple has like a long stem that wasn't necessary for this. Somehow they cut it off like too far up, whatever. So then that's not considered a handle. It's not necessary for the fruit. Okay. Yeah, like if it's used for the eating, so then that would be a handle. We're going to see some interesting things. Amar Rab Abba, Amar Rav Huna. Rab Abba says in the name of Rav Huna. There's going to be a machlekes here. 2 students of Rav Huna. Usually Rav Huna is the student of Rav, the major student of Rav. Right? Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. We're dealing with, Rav Huna would be 2nd generation, we're dealing with 3rd generation. Rav Abba says in the name of Rav Huna, Habaytze legas. If someone harvests grapes, but not table grapes, they harvest the grapes for wine. So in layada, those handles, those stems and all of that that's attached to the grapes are not necessary for the grapes. You actually don't want them there. So if there's tumah that touches the grapes, it doesn't spread to the handle. And if there's tumah that touches the handle, it doesn't spread to the grapes because the stems are not necessary for the wine. Rav Menashe bar Gada Amar Rav Huna. Rav Menashe bar Gada says the name of Rav Huna. Hakaitze l'schach. If someone harvests wheat and he harvests the wheat for schach, how's he gonna use wheat for schach? So the actual wheat itself he doesn't need for the schach, but the wheat grows on a big stalk. So he wants the stalk for the schach. The wheat itself, I don't know, whatever. That just happens to be there. So ein liyades. That's also not a handle because the stalk is not there for the wheat. It's not there to hold the wheat. If you wanted the wheat, then the stalk could have been a handle when you bundle it together or something. But he didn't cut it for transporting wheat. He cut it for schach. So ein liyades. The stalk is not a handle to the grain. The Gemara explains like this: Mandam or kaitzer koskin baitzer. If you say that the wheat, the harvesting, Rav Menashe bar Gada, he said that the harvesting is not a handle. So for sure the grapes is not a handle. In other words, Rav Menashe bar Gada agrees with Rav Abba. They're both not handles. The grape stalks or the wheat stalks are not handles.
Grapes for wine.
Grapes for wine and the wheat stalks for schach are not handles. We understood what he said about kaitzer, that you don't need the stalk to hold the wheat because you're not interested in the wheat. But he didn't mention anything about the wine. Why are you so sure that he holds that the grapes handles, that the stems are not a handle to the grapes? It says like this: he doesn't want the stalks there. They're going to absorb some of the wine. But they say, why do they cut off the head of the fish before they fry it? They didn't want it to drink any of the oil. Anyway, he doesn't want the stems absorbing some of his nice wine, so he wants to get rid of the stem. So the stem is not a handle there. He doesn't want it at all. If you don't want it, then it's for sure not considered a handle. So we have sort of like a kal v'chomer. If he holds that the wheat is not a handle, the stems of the wheat, so for sure the stems of the wine is not a handle. Mandam or baitzer, what about the other way? What about Rav Abba? He said the stems of the wine, of the grapes, is not a handle. But what about the wheat? Yesh layadis probably does have a handle. You know what? The wheat is good because the wheat keeps the stalks from blowing away, like a paperweight. So maybe it's still a handle. It's considered a handle because he wants the wheat. And this holds the wheat. The stalk is used to hold the wheat. So according to the Boitzer, Rababa, we don't know what he holds about the stalks. Now there's a problem here, that if the stalks are a handle to the wheat, that means that it's makabel tuma. That means that you can't use it for schach. Yeah. Okay. Now the Gemara says, "Name of the Rabban Asher bar Gada Tanaihi." Let's take this back. It's very possible that this machlokes goes back earlier, and Rabban Asher bar Gada that says cutting stalks for schach is going to be kosher. It's not considered a handle. It could be this goes back earlier. Machlokes Tanai. The Tanya was taught in a brisa. Soichi teinim behem teinim. You have a stalk, a stem of a fig tree, of figs, and there's figs on the stem. You have a stalk of a grapevine, and there's grapes hanging on it. Stalks, and there's the wheat that's on top. It's called brooms. The dates, they grow on like one next to another in a line on each side of the stem. So it's a stalk, a long stem of dates. Kulan imselis mirba ksheira dimlav psula. When we spoke about schach pasel, we said that schach pasel can be batal. So if there's more waste, in other words, more stem than fruit, then the fruit becomes batal. That means that the stems are kosher for schach, according to this opinion. Kosher to non-kosher, you have more kosher schach than non-kosher schach, it's going to be good. Others say, usually we said Achirim was Reb Meir, and I remember that there was something about this. It wasn't so clear. Achirim Maimrim, others say, Achiyu Kashim Ruben Alayadis. Alayadis Valaychla. It's not enough just to have more kosher schach than fruits. You actually need to have more kosher schach than fruits plus stem. Now, 1 second. Your kosher schach is the stem. What we're saying is like this. Part of the stem is considered a stem, and part of the stem is considered not necessary. Why? Because we're not just talking about the eshkol of the grapes or something. We're talking about the piece of the vine before the cluster. So we're having, like, the thick part of the vine is also cut off over here. So if you need to have not just more kosher schach than the fruit, you need to have more kosher schach than stem and fruit. Obviously, what he's holding is that the stem is not kosher for schach. You have to be mevatel the stem also. My love, v'hakamiflagi. Mar savar yesh le'em yadis. Achirim holds that there is a yad, and Amar savar ein le'em yadis. And the Rabbanon hold that there's no yad. So it turns out the Rabban Asher bar Gada is only going to fit. He says that there's no yad to the stalks. He's going to fit with the Tanakama, with the Rabbana. L'Rababa v'adei Tanoi. Gemara says, according to Rababa, it's definitely a machlekes Tanoi. L'Rababa would say that there is a stem here, right? He said that by boitzer legas, but not koitzer l'schach. By boitzer legas, he said that there was no stem, but by koitzer there was a stem. He's going to hold like a chayrim that says that there's a stem, and he's going to argue with the Tanakama. Is it possible that we can learn Rabban Asher bar Gada? He said that the stem of the wheat is not a yad for the wheat. Is it possible that maybe Achirim would agree with him? Achirim said that there is a stem. How would they agree with him? So, Amalach Rabban Asher, the Kuli al Masavri Akaitzel Eschachin LeYadis. You know what? Everyone really holds that there's no yad. There is no handle. You cut the grain for schach, you can use it. There's no handle there. It's not makabel tuma. So why does Achirim say you have to be bavatala? Well, you didn't read it carefully. Over here, it didn't say why you harvested it. If you harvested it for food, so then there's a stem. Now you wanted to use it for schach. So the stem was there from before. Really, if you harvest it for schach, even Achirim would say that there's no stem and you can use the whole thing for schach because you don't need the weed. Over here, you've harvested it for food. Then later on, you changed your mind and you're trying to get rid of the handle because you changed your mind. It doesn't work like that. The handle is still there. That's why Achirim says that there's considered a yad, there's considered a handle, because your original intention when you harvested it was for food. You explained that so well. Now you lost the other opinion. If you harvested it for food, so then why would anyone say that there's no handle? What's the reason for the Rabbanan that say there's no handle? So maybe you're going to answer like this. When you changed your mind, the Rabbanan hold that the status of the stem of the stalk also changes. You harvested it for one thing. Achirim says, okay, it's stuck. It's now a handle to the grain. And the Rabbanan say it's not stuck. You changed your mind, and it loses its status of a handle. Can changing your mind change the status of the handle? But we have a Mishnah that says the opposite. It says, Kol hakelim yardim l'deitameh b'machshava, on top of your dalet. All utensils, they become tameh with your thought. It would work like this. Let's say there's a piece of leather. When would the leather become tameh? When it's a finished product. So it depends what you wanted to use it for. If you wanted to make it into shoes, so it's incomplete, and if tumah touches it, it's not tameh yet because it's not a keli yet. If you wanted to use it as a mat, on your table or something to sit on, so it's already complete. So your mind is going to make it a keli or not a keli, depends on what you want. So So let's say you thought like this. Let's say you said, you know what? I'm going to use it for a table mat. So it's going to become tameh. It's finished. I'm done. I finished the process of this leather. Tumah touches it. I say, I'm going to make it into shoes. So afterwards, so you want to say it's not a keli. It's not a keli. It's not tameh. It doesn't work like that. You have to start cutting it up and, and doing something to it. Your thought doesn't take it out from being a keli. And the Gemara and the Mishnah has like this rule. It says, "Ma'ase moitzi." No. I gave the extreme. Yeah. Even if it didn't become tameh yet, you still can't change it. It becomes a keli immediately. Yeah. So it has this rule. It says, "Ma'ase moitzi miyad ma'ase." Action can remove it from an action. Umiyad machshava, and it can also remove it from a thought. But machshava ina metzia lemiyad ma'ase v'lemiyad machshava. But machshava, thought, can't change an action that was done, and it can't even change a thought that was done. So all of this was trying to explain. The problem is that Menashe Bar Gada got into like a little fix over here, trying to say that Achirim agree with him. They say that there's a yad to the stem. So how did he explain that? That Achirim should agree with him if there's a yad. So he said, well, that's because it was harvested for food, and then he changed his mind. And changing your mind doesn't help. So he said, if that's the case, so what's the reason for the Rabbanan that said it's considered kosher for schach? If you harvested it, the case has to be the same. The halacha could be different. They said, well, maybe they hold that your thoughts that you had, that you're when you changed your mind, you're gonna use it for schach, that took it out from being a yad and made it into not a yad. They said, yeah, but thought doesn't work like that. You see, when it comes to kalim, the thought doesn't change it. Once it becomes a keli, it's a keli. You thought you have to start cutting it up. to change it. The thoughts aren't going to do it. So how could the Rabbanan say that it's not a yad? Gemara says, 1 second, you're doing a comparison here. It's not a perfect comparison. Maybe you can explain like this. That Mishnah that you quoted to me, that was an actual keli. Over here, you're trying to compare it to a yad. Maybe a yad goes in and out with your thought. I thought it was a yad. I thought it wasn't. You go back and forth. By the keli, you're right. By a keli, that's something that's really permanent. So once it's established as a keli, only a maisa could change it. But by a yad, maybe a thought can change a yad. I will use it as a handle. I won't use it as. Says Vatanan, there's a problem with that. We have a Mishnah that says, Kol yadas ha'ichlin shabasim begarin tahiris. We're going to see later that Rabbi Yossi Matami. All handles that were basasan begarin. The Gemara doesn't explain right away what basasan is. And that's the difficulty with learning this Gemara. You just have to hold out until you get there. There's two possibilities. Either basasan means that it got untied, or basasan means it got crushed. So, the yadais of Eichlin, let's say it got untied. That got untied on the threshing floor. They become tahar. So in other words, the way I transport wheat is, at least initially, is I tie the bundles, the stalks together, and then I move it to a threshing floor, then I thresh it, and then I'll have the grain, I'll go into sacks or whatever. But originally, those stalks are handles to the wheat. So what happens when it's basasan begarin, when it's untied on the threshing floor? So tahiris, they become tar. You don't need it anymore. You don't need those handles. So bishleim lamandamar basasan hitarugdan shaper. If you say that basasan means you didn't do anything to it, it used to be tameh because it was a handle to transport the wheat. And now you untied it. You didn't do anything to the wheat itself. You just untied it. There was no change in the stalk. And nevertheless, it becomes tar. So then good. You're right. You have to have an answer. Why the Rabbanan say that if you intended it for food and you changed your mind for schach, it's basically changing your mind, is untying it. But if basan means crushing, so you have no raya that there's a difference between yadais and kalim. Your thoughts shouldn't change it. The Gemara answer is hachanami shebasan mamish. You know what? Let's go back to the brisa that we quoted, that there was a machlekes the Rabbanan and Acherim regarding using these things for schach. The Rabbanan said that there's no handle there, and Acherim said there is a handle. We said that you originally harvested for food, and then you changed your mind and you want to use it for schach. Acherim says you harvested for food, there's a handle. The Rabbanan said, no, you changed your mind, that's good enough. We said, but we have an opinion that says changing your mind doesn't work. I said, yeah, you not only did you change your mind, but you also crushed it. You also crushed it. So, you did an action. So now it's loses the handle. The Gemara says, now we go back to, why did Acherim say that the handle's still there if you did a Maisa? The Gemara answers, the Amar Rabbi Yossi. There's a little parentheses. Rabbi Yossi says it remains Tameh. Rabbi Yossi Matame. The Tanah and Rabbi Yossi Matame. The Gemara says, hi, Mai, what's going on over here? We understand Rabbi Yossi only in that case. We don't understand what Rabbi Yossi is saying in this case for schach. In that case, Rabbi Yossi was Matame. Why? Over there, the reason why Rabbi Yossi says it's Tameh is because it was a statement that Reb Shimon ben Lakish said many generations later. But he made this statement, and that explains Rabbi Yossi. You know why I need those stalks still there even after it's crushed? Because if I want to move over the grain, I want to use a pitchfork, I can't use a pitchfork for the grain. I use a pitchfork for the stalks. I can grab the stalks with the pitchfork. So the stalks are still a handle. If I want to move it around, I'm starting to crush it, but if I want to move it around, the stalks are still there. I still have a reason. But over here, you started to crush it, and you put it up for schach. You don't need the grain. What are you doing with the stalks attached to the grain? It's not necessary. If it was for food, good. But now you weren't interested in the food, and you're using it for stuff, and you started to crush it. So it's not the food anymore. So what do you need the pitchfork? You don't need a pitchfork. So you don't need the stalks attached to the grain. Gemara's answer is you need it for cleanup time. After you're finished with the sukkah, you want to take everything apart. The stalks are easier to pull the grains away because they're still attached. If you want to clean up, at the end, you just pull it by the stalks and you'll be able to remove everything. So the stalks are still relevant according to Rabbi Yosi, and that's why there would be an opinion of a cherem. Rabbi Meir would hold like Rabbi Yosi, if a cherem is Rabbi Meir in the Brisa, would hold like Rabbi Yosi. Okay, Kufa. We learned before, Kol Yad Esaychlim Shabbasim Garin Tyrus, Rabbi Yosi Matami, there's a machlekes, if you started to crush it or untie it, is it tahar, the stalks, is it considered a yad? Is it still necessary anymore for transport? And Rabbi Yosi says it's still tummy. My basasan, we just explained what it meant, but we didn't give you the original source. That's what the Gufa. Gufa is like re-examining a statement of Amiroim. We quote a brisa and we put in the Amiroim that are explaining this. So it's Rabbi Yochanan Amar Basasan Mamash. Rabbi Yochanan says that it was actually crushed. Rabbi Eliezer, it's supposed to be Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar was a student of Rabbi Yochanan. Chavrusa at one point. Rabbi Lazar ben Padas. After Rish Lakish passed away, Rabbi Lazar took over his position as a Chavrusa with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Lazar Eimer, that's why it's corrected on the side. Hitter Agdan. Rabbi Lazar says it's just untied. Bishleimel Rabbi Lazar Damar Basan Hitter Agdan Haina time of the Rabbi Yosi. According to Rabbi Lazar, that says it's just untied. We still understand Rabbi Yosi, that you still need the stalks there to move it around. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, that says it's already being crushed. So why is it tamei? What do you need? Obviously, you're starting to take the grains off. So Rabbi Yosi, because you still want to use it, be able to grab the grains with the pitchfork, can still turn it over with this, because the stalks are attached. Amar Rabbi Lazar. Why are the prayers of tzaddikim compared to a pitchfork? It's coming to tell you, just like the pitchfork can turn over the grain from one place to another, also the prayers of tzaddikim, it turns over the intent of Hashem, from cruelty. Well, cruelty doesn't mean cruelty. It means not being compassionate to being compassionate. Yeah. That the tefillah of tzaddikim. Okay, let's leave it here.
Thank you.
Have a good day.